Welcome to the Trailblazer Talks podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Hope Wilson. This podcast is designed to encourage and equip you to be a trailblazer right where you are, to help you discover your God-given purpose and bring you talks each week that will inspire you to do what you were made for. Each week, we will walk through different topics to help you grow in your life, career, and leadership. My hope is that you'll become poised for purpose and walk in that daily. I hope each week you'll feel more equipped to be a trailblazer right where you are. So let's get into this week's episode. Hey friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Trailblazer Talks podcast. I have been loving this series on church, and I hope that you have too. I hope that it's been helpful and beneficial. I hope that it's challenged you and it's equipping you, and I hope that it's helping you have the right conversations in your own communities and helping us all grow as leaders and as the body of Christ. This week, I'm talking with my friend Lauren Sheppard, and Lauren is on staff at Queen City Church, the church that I go to. She is overseeing all of our different ministries, and she's on the leadership team, and she's also a pastor. But Lauren also worked in the corporate world for a while, and so I'm excited to talk with her today about how we bridge those gaps. How can we be the church beyond the four walls of Sunday? And how can we continue building community all throughout our cities? So I'm excited to talk to Lauren today, and I hope that you learn something and gain some wisdom from our conversation. Let's hop on in. Lauren, thank you so much for being on the show today. I'm excited to have this conversation with you. For those of you who don't know, Lauren and I go to Queen City Church together, and I met her a few years ago, and she is on the leadership team there. And so I wanted to ask her on the show to continue our church series conversation. So Lauren, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, well, I'm excited and honored to have the opportunity to get to talk about the church. It's definitely a passion. So, I am originally from the Oklahoma and Texas area. I grew up in church and, have honestly followed Jesus a lot of my life, and I'm thankful for that experience. And hasn't always been easy, but I am so thankful. And I grew up in church. And so it's been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. And I, in college, got connected to an amazing church in Oklahoma, and kind of through a series of events, found my calling and kind of started pursuing full-time ministry. And so I graduated college and was on staff at a couple of different churches, mostly in student ministry. And a lot of my passions are in leadership and discipleship. And then about 4 years ago, I moved to Cincinnati to be a part of launching Queen City Church, and I have absolutely loved it. And so now I oversee all of our ministries. So I lead a team of people that directly lead kids ministry, student ministry, and everything that we do for groups in our church.
That's awesome. You do so much, and you do a lot of great things at church. So I appreciate your leadership, and I'm glad that you were available to have this conversation, because I know that you have a lot of wisdom to offer from just all your different experiences in life. And I know that for a season, I know you've worked mostly in ministry, but for a season, you've also worked in the marketplace. And that's something that I would love to talk about a bit today, because I know that there's a lot of listeners who maybe aren't in full-time ministry, but they are part of a church and they are, Christians and believers. And so I would love just to hear your thoughts on what is the biggest thing you learned in your marketplace experience about being the church beyond just Sunday and beyond vocational ministry, and just any encouragement that you could offer to our listeners who maybe work in the marketplace so they can be more confident being a light for God.
Yeah, it's a great question. When we launched our church, spent, before essentially the church could support financially full-time staff, I worked in the marketplace at a couple of different places. And honestly, it was a eye-opening, I think, and experience. And because I had done ministry for so long, and so kind of went back into the quote unquote corporate world, and honestly wouldn't have traded it for the world. I think it really grounded me and helped me again to connect with why we actually do what we do and what it looks like to be like Jesus all the time and in your job and all that kind of stuff. So I'm deeply thankful that I had that season. So I would say I think my biggest and I think this is a bit of a philosophical shift, or kind of something that I think we're all challenged with, is I think as humans, we easily define our lives into sacred and secular. And, we think about sacred being things we do at church and reading our Bible and these kind of compartmentalized times of prayer or whatever. And then secular is kind of everything else. And I think truly following Jesus and being like him is there is no differentiation between the two. It is just it's who you are. And so I think, my experience was how do I be the same person I met at church on Sunday morning in the workplace? Do I have the same attitude? Am I kind? Am I a joy to be around? Am I asking people how they are and really meaning it? Am I caring for people? Am I doing a good job and being excellent in my work? And, I think it really challenged me. And I think my encouragement would be to truly be as much like Jesus in all environments, whether that's at church or in the workplace. And I think if you truly try your best, nobody is perfect, but I think being like Jesus is so countercultural to what is normal in our world. And I think that in and of itself, speaks to people. And so I had, plenty of conversations, even over time, of just developing relationships with coworkers where, you talk about things that are important to you or how you spend your time. And so for me, church came up in that, and was able to have some very meaningful conversations with people just through conversation and relationship. And so I think my biggest encouragement would just be to see life as a whole and not parts, and truly our calling or our goal is to be like Jesus, and trying to really figure out what does that look like in my home, in my work, in when I'm at the grocery store, how am I always growing to become more like Jesus?
I love that, because I think that so often we do try to compartmentalize the parts of our life and be oh, well, Sunday's for this, and I'm in my church bubble, and now I'm in my work bubble. And there shouldn't be these bubbles. And I know I've worked in the corporate world my whole career, but I've been very involved in any church that I've been a part of. And it can be easy to just, get in that Christian bubble and not really think about it as much outside of that. But I know, like you said, you just lived your life and showed the things that you were passionate about, and that happened to be God and Jesus. And that's been something true for my life too with work, is I didn't necessarily just walk in the office and be hey guys, I'm a Christian. And, I go to church. It just would come up in the way that I lived my life, or the things I would talk about. They say what'd you do over the weekend? I was oh, I did this thing with my church or whatever. And so then people, they listen. And eventually, if somebody had something going on with their family, they'd be hey, I know you go to church and I know you pray. Would you please keep so-and-so in their prayers? And so it's just little things like that. I don't think it has to be in your face kind of faith with people. I think that, like you said, living your life like Jesus really is impactful, and people take notice of that. Are there any other ways that we can be the church beyond Sunday? Because I know that obviously we go to church on Sunday, and I know at our church we talk about Sundays affect our Mondays. And so I would love to talk a little bit about that, because I know Luke 10:2 talks about how the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. And again, I think so often we are oh, well, I'm going to leave a pastor to do that. That's their job. He can be the worker. How can we do that? Maybe if we're not in full-time ministry.
Yeah. Again, great question. And I think it's, even referencing that verse that you just talked about, I actually read that this week in my time with God. And it's such a inspiring verse, and I think challenging verse, overall. But what I noticed this week when I read it is the reason, right before Jesus says that, it says that he was moved with compassion for people, that people were a sheep without a shepherd, and you think about sheep and they're honestly pretty dumb, and they need direction, and they need someone to kind of guide them and all of those things. But I think what really stood out to me this week was that that Jesus says that because he had compassion for people. And I think simply like, I was so challenged in that, even though I am a pastor and even though I do ministry full time, it's like, am I making space in my life when I go to the grocery store to like have compassion for people? Like I'm a pretty task oriented or like get it done kind of person. And so it's easy for me to fall into that mode, even in my everyday life. And so I think, I think there are so many practical things that can be done. And, there are times when it's good to just be a listener. And there are times when it's good to say something. And it's like, honestly, there is no right or wrong. I think the Holy Spirit has to guide so much of what that looks like. But I think, again, I was so challenged this week of like, do I let compassion move me, in what I do, even though the harvest is plentiful? Like, am I doing that to just help people know Jesus? Or like, am I truly letting compassion, I guess, kind of like be the motivation behind that? And so I think as long as your heart is in the right place, as long as you're guided by those motivations, that the actual action of it, kind of comes out of that and comes out of that place of really where your heart is.
Yeah, I love the part about compassion because I think that is a huge factor of it, of, letting the Holy Spirit, like giving room for the Holy Spirit to guide you and move you in compassion. If you see somebody when you're out shopping, or if you see somebody at the grocery store, maybe there's like a homeless person that you pass. And if we're not allowing ourselves to be moved by compassion, we can miss those moments sometimes and we can get focused, like you said, because I can be task oriented too. I definitely am. Like when I go places, I'm pretty focused on like, okay, I need to buy this and I do this and go to this place. And I've realized when I like slow down a little and try to pay attention more, those opportunities arise because I'm open for them to happen. Is there any areas too that you think we could work on to like bridge the gap more between vocational ministry and like marketplace? Like any areas where it feels like there's kind of like one or the other, but we can really like bridge the gap? Because I know our church does a really good job of trying to, like with QCLA, the leadership program we have for business leaders and really any leader. Are there anything that churches can do to bridge some of those gaps and involve community leaders more and things like that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I know something that we have wrestled with a lot and continue to wrestle with. And you did mention QCLA, which is something that we started just to, it's a huge passion of our church and Pastor Brian and myself. And so that was kind of birthed out of that and just wanting to help people. But I think kind of, again, it's a bit of a philosophical thing that I think we had to wrestle through a little bit and have conversation about. Was like, I think most churches, when they talk about leadership development, they're talking about it in regards to like, how do we develop leaders for our church? And that is like a major challenge. To be honest, like to have leaders who are like equipped to lead ministry and are at a place spiritually and emotionally and have the skill to be able to do that. I mean, that's a lot of what I give my time to is to developing people and developing myself to be able to do that well. But I think the philosophical shift was like, okay, yes, we want to do that and we need to do that as a church, but how do we also like come alongside these like incredible leaders who have massive influence in our city and are connected to people and other networks of leaders? And, how do we like kind of spiritually support them and create conversation and community with other leaders who are going through some of the same challenges that they are? And so I think, I really believe we've only like scratched the surface of what it could be in our city. And I've even dreamed about it being an opportunity to like connect other leaders to God. And, could it be something where we just through organic relationship or kind of events or networking opportunities, like is that a way that we really could be like Jesus to other leaders in our city and not make it so much about like building just our church? And so I think, to be honest, like I think that's pretty uncharted territory for the the capital C church. And so I don't even know, like, I think what the future of that looks like, but I'm excited and I'm very passionate about that because I think it matters. And you talk about the church being outside the four walls of a Sunday. It's like, that's a massive way to impact our city, is if leaders in our city have, like, if they know God and they're making a difference and they're leading whatever thing that they're leading in a way that's like biblically grounded and all of that. So I think that is one of the kind of dreams in our heart as God unfolds that, to be able to really like support and connect with other leaders in our city.
Yeah. And I like that too, because I think that it'll encourage other leaders who are listening to this to implement some of that in their own cities too, and just use that as like a catalyst to figure out ways to connect with those leaders in their city and connect with the kind of like more of the marketplace side of things, to plant leaders in those different areas so they feel confident as well. And I think that can only build the church, honestly. And switching gears a little bit, I want to talk also about community, because I know that's a big, I mean, all the ministries that you oversee basically are like community in our church. And so I know it's a big part of your heart. It's part of my heart too. And I know it can, I mean, especially as an adult, it can be hard to make friends sometimes. It can be hard to, like, after you're out of school, to find ways to connect with people, especially like healthy relationships too. It's not just, you know, the people when you were just forced to be around them in school, like now you have to intentionally go and find friendships. What are some ways that, like, within church that you think we could encourage or better build community and help people not give up on trying to build community?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think, you know, for our church, we don't have a corner on the market. You know, we're still learning and growing. And I think the things, again, that I'm thinking about or dreaming about and trying to figure out how to best accomplish is, how do we make community like easy and organic, and you know, how you would like form friendships in your everyday life. You know, how is how we're facilitating that, does that reflect that? And so I think we've definitely tried different things, and we'll continue to try different things to make it as easy as possible. But I think my encouragement to people who are in that space, and I don't want to downplay like how lonely that can be, and most definitely have personally experienced seasons like that, where it's like, man, that loneliness is like, it can do something to your soul. You know, it is a hard place to be. And obviously, like, we believe in community. The Bible talks about, you know, it's such a foundational part of who we are. And that's a whole different topic. But I think what I would encourage people is like, just to not give up. Like, I think great relationships, like you click with certain people, and why, I'm sure there's some psychologists who could probably explain that better than I can. But you know, it takes time to like find those people that you really click with and connect with on a deeper level. And even beyond that, it takes time for relationships to grow. And one thing, you know, Pastor Ryan, our pastor, says is like, any new relationship is always awkward. And it is like, it just takes time to like really get to know someone. And it does take courage to kind of take that step of faith and to even try. And so I think I would just, you know, on the church side, I think it's our responsibility to try to make it as easy as we can and organic, and to foster as best we can ways that create that. But on the, I guess, the person side or the personal side of it, I think it's the responsibility to have courage to step out and to, like, it is uncomfortable trying to go meet new people, and just embrace it. Like, it is what it is, and it doesn't always have to be like that. But if you know, if that hasn't clicked yet, or you haven't found the right community, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It just takes time, I think, most of the time.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. Cause I know when I like had first graduated college and got invited to church and started getting back involved in church again for the first time in a really long time, it was hard, but I realized that the people I had been hanging out with, like, when I wasn't following Jesus were just not the best influence of people to hang out with. And so I had gone to a college church service before graduating, and they talked about, getting involved in small groups and things like that and continuing to show up. And I know whenever I went all in and went to small groups, it was awkward because I'm an introvert. And so going by myself to these groups and like being in groups of people where I knew absolutely no one was really hard. But I ended up meeting some of my best friends because I pushed through the awkward and was like, hey, like, would you want to get dinner or coffee before small group next week? Or like things like that. And just pushing through the awkward. Because I think people are always looking for a community. And so whether it's in the church or not in the church, I think the church, like that's what church is. It's part of God's plan to be like a family of God and to build the church in that way. And so I think like people are craving that. And so I would encourage people, like, don't feel awkward because everyone feels awkward. Like you don't have to worry if someone's like, why did she ask me to hang out? Like they're honestly probably looking for a friend too. So I think like be the friend that you want to be. And I know there's a whole pool of people too that I've talked with and that have had conversations with me who they maybe like joined church and got really involved and served in all these different areas. And then they got burnout, or maybe they experienced some type of like hurt through church because they're either some expectation wasn't met or somebody hurt their feelings or something deeper happened at the church, wherever it was, that caused them to feel excluded. Or sometimes I've heard people mention that churches can be cliquey or those types of things. What are some ways that we as a church can try to like help those areas or encourage the people who are feeling those ways so that those experiences don't lead them away from church, but they can recover and move forward and get back involved in church?
Yeah, I think, man, what a topic. Like, I think there's so many different ways to go with that. But, I think, as a church leader, I think our heart, and again, I think this kind of answers both sides of the question. But at the end of the day, like we are humans, and we are doing our very best with what we believe God is like leading us to. And I think something we value so much, and every chance we get is like, God, we need you. We are dependent upon you. And it's truly not just like this, cool thing to say. It's like, we need the direction of God because we're too human, and so, with humans come imperfection. And that's the same way in the church. Like as good as our intent is, we will always come up short. Like there is no exception to that. And so I think, the church has hurt a lot of people. And I think there's, again, could be a whole conversation on why. And I think a lot of it has to do with, doing ministry at a certain pace that it kind of outpaces really where God is and that kind of thing. And so that's something that we constantly are talking about, is like, we don't want to outpace God. And so there are many decisions we make to keep things slower than we could because we want to care for people in our team and all of that. So, but I think for people that have experienced that, I think my encouragement would be like just a few things. One, like allow God to heal you. At the end of the day, like hurt is hurt, whether it's a relationship, whether it was a church. The church is not an institution. It's made up of people. So a lot of times I think that hurt is connected to a person. So there's forgiveness. There's allowing God to heal that. I think a couple of other things are like, be gentle with your expectations. Like expect it not to be perfect. Now, it doesn't mean every church is for you. Like there's people who come to our church and it's not for them. And that is totally cool. Like we just want people to be connected to a church that connects them to God. And so that's okay. But I think, as a leader, sometimes it feels like the expectations that people have are so unrealistic when it's like, we're just people too, we're just trying to do our very best to lead how God wants us to lead. And so, yeah, I think if there is hurt there, like maybe take ownership, check those expectations, allow God to heal. Don't be afraid to communicate. I think that, as a leader, it's like, even this week, I had some of those conversations with people that are like, their expectations haven't been met. And I want to hear those things. And I try to do that with so much like humility, and it's hard to hear that sometimes, but I think we want to do that with security and humility to say, like, we just want to grow too, and I think if there's that kind of mutual relationship and understanding on both sides, it creates something that is like what the church is intended to be, which is, it's just a community of believers that are, following God and making disciples and trying to make a difference in the world. And there is no like spiritual elite and not spiritual, that whole dynamic is, I think it's past its day, in my opinion. And it's just, we are all people and God's called us, and we take that calling very seriously. But we're also at the same time just humans.
Yeah, I think that's a really important part of it, is that we are humans. And just because someone's a Christian doesn't mean that they're perfect, or that they suddenly hit this level and it's like, well, I can't do any wrong anymore. So if I hurt you, like, sorry about it. So I think it is important to remember, because I've had that conversation with friends before, where the term like church hurt, really it's people hurt, that are in people in the church cause some type of hurt. And sometimes that hurt is, I definitely want to validate, like, that hurt is real and that's painful. And there's so many different levels of hurt. And there's so much that goes on in the global church world. But I liked what you said about taking time to heal and working through forgiveness and talking to your church leaders and having those conversations, to, instead of just walking away and leaving that church. And sometimes it is a situation where maybe you do need to leave that particular church depending on what the thing is. But I would say good leaders listen. And like Lauren said, like, have conversations with the leaders in your church and work together to overcome some of those different things, whether it's something that you've noticed needs to maybe change in the church, or you see an area that's like a gap. And because leaders don't see everything. They see as much as they can, but sometimes they don't know if an area is falling short, or if there's like maybe a need for this in the church. And so I think listening is a huge thing.
And I would say honestly, that's what I told the people I was talking with this week. That's the hardest part of what, for me, is like, it's just gaining perspective. Like, I have a perspective, but from where I'm at in an organization to how that plays out in just people's lives who are attending the church sometimes could be so vastly different than the intention or the vision that we have. And so I want that perspective, but I think people assume, oh, they already know, or they're aware of the experience. And it's like, no, it can be very disconnected sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Pastor Ryan talks about closing the gap. And I think that's an example of that, is like, church leaders may see one area, and we may, like, as church members or people in the church, we may see other areas and have those differing expectations. And so it's kind of the whole, you don't know what you don't know thing of, your leaders may not know what they don't know, or they may not see everything until you tell them. And I think it's good not to assume that they're seeing it, because I think that's where in any relationship we can get into trouble being like, oh, well, they knew that and they already meant that. And it's like, you talk to them and they're like, no, I had no idea. I'm so sorry.
Right.
And on the other side of that too, I'd love for you just to give some encouragement to leaders and pastors that are in a position to care for the people of the church. Because I feel like there's a lot happening in the church world right now. And I feel like pastors and leaders can get discouraged at times, and they need encouragement too, because there is a lot of heat, on pastors at times to be perfect and all of that. So I'd love just some encouragement for any pastors or leaders listening to walk away just feeling a little better than maybe they came in today.
Yeah. I think it is such a unique calling and experience to lead the church, especially in the culture and the age and the time of the world that we live in right now. And I think I would just always encourage you to stay true to what God has called you to do. It's easy, it can be easy to get caught up in, frustration or discouragement or, the culture or like so many things, it can be very discouraging at times, but I think I always like simply and as humbly as I can say, go back to like, I want to please God. Like I want to, people can say what they want. They cannot say what they want. Like they cannot know anything about our church or, and that's fine. Like, I think my heart is like, I want to stand before Jesus and I want to please him. And I think if we live our lives that way, and kind of quiet the noise, we can finish our race. Like there's a way to do it. And the church is needed now more than any other time in history, I believe. And so the calling is important and it's significant, and the world needs what the church has in the true sense of what the church is. And so I think the importance of what we do cannot be diminished. But I think at times, for me, I would just encourage people like to quiet the noise and truly like fix our eyes on Jesus. Like what we do is for the pleasure of God, and that's it. Like, and so to just stay true to that, to stay true to the calling, to stay faithful to it, and we do it with such devotion because it's for Jesus.
Yeah, I think that's so good. I think anytime that we feel like the heaviness of the world, or we feel like maybe even just like attacked because the larger capital C church gets attacked or something like that, I think it can be easy to get our eyes off the prize of like, okay, God called me to do this and it's for God's glory and I have a mission. And so I think that that's so good to constantly come back to our why and our mission, to stay encouraged. Is there anything else that you would like to leave the listeners with today, or any final wisdom or encouragement?
Don't give up on the church. I mean, I love the conversation today. And, again, I think right now in culture and, there is so much being said about the church, and some of it is so warranted and needed. And I think in God's grace, there's such a like purifying thing that could be happening in the church right now that I think is significant of really getting back to like, this is what it means, like at the core of what it is. And I think that's necessary, and it's painful and hard sometimes, but I do think it's the grace of God that kind of is leading us back to that. But I think my encouragement is like, I want to be someone who doesn't point fingers like or critique. I want to be someone who like picks up a hammer and builds. And I think my encouragement to people would be like, whatever that looks like, whatever that passion is, whatever way that you can, find healing and take your time, but like help be a part of building the church. And I don't just mean like inside the four walls, but I mean in everyday life, like being like Jesus in our everyday life. And so I think I would encourage people with that. Like, don't give up on it. It is so significant and needs to be built more now than ever before.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, thank you so much for being here today, being on the show, sharing your wisdom. I know that this is going to help both people in the church and ministry leaders and leaders at all levels. So I'm just so appreciative of your time today, Lauren.
Of course. I had such a great time talking to you.
I loved my conversation with Lauren, and I hope that you did too. If this conversation was beneficial to you, I would love for you to share it with your followers on Instagram, on your Facebook, wherever you share things on social media. I would love for you to spread the word and help more people to be able to hear this message. I hope that it helped you to learn something about community and also being the church beyond the four walls of Sunday. Whether you're in vocational ministry or whether you are in the marketplace in the corporate world, I think it's something that we can all continue to grow in and continue to get better at. And if you haven't yet, I would love if you subscribe to the podcast. And I would also love if you can leave us a review. That really helps others to get to know the show and find out if it's for them. So I would love to hear what you have to say about the show by leaving us a review. Next week, we'll be wrapping up the church series. And I'm so excited because next week's episode is all about deconstruction and all the challenging parts of our faith, all the challenging parts of being the church. And And so I hope that it's beneficial to you. It'll be a life-giving conversation that will help you grow and will meet you right where you are. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you back here next week.